Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Filipino Free Thinkers podcast that's also a video. Today, we're having another conversation for a cause, this time with Michael Shermer. He's the founding publisher of Skeptic magazine, the executive director of Skeptics Society, and a columnist for Scientific American. He's the author of several books, including The Believing Brain and Why We Believe Weird Things. Hello, Michael.
How you doing?
So your latest column was called Is God Dying? So why do you think that is? Why is God dying?
Well, I was citing a number of statistics that shows the decrease in religiosity in Western countries, particularly in European countries, the support for separation of church and state in all liberal democracies, the rise of the nuns, the so-called non-churched or unchurched people that tick the box for none on surveys that they don't belong to any particular religion. So that would certainly be a decline in religion. That's 1 in 5. In America, it's 20%. That's a huge voting bloc. And so I think if we take the historian's perspective, the long view, the, say, last 500 years, the decline of religion is quite striking in a number of areas of life. Science has replaced religion as a means of explaining how the world works and the universe and life and so forth. And it is now going to be displaced in terms of morality and ethics and that part of the world. So that's why I claim God is dying.
So there was a time that you never thought you would write such an article. You were once a fundamentalist Christian. Can you tell us about your deconversion for a bit?
Yeah, I've told this story about 10,000 times and written about quite a few places, but for the one person on Mars who hasn't heard the story. So when I was in high school, it was influenced by my friends, my peer group, on becoming a born-again evangelical Christian. And so I did it just, sort of on a whim, just to see what it was all about. But I took it pretty seriously. I studied the Bible, read it very carefully. I went to Bible classes and so on. Then I went to Pepperdine University, which is a Church of Christ school, very conservative, very Christian. And there I signed up to study for theology and major in theology and study the Old Testament and the New Testament and the life of Christ and the writings of C.S. Lewis and so on. But then I switched to psychology because at some point I wanted to get a job as a college professor. And to do that, you have to have a PhD. And to do that in theology, you have to master Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic, Latin. And I couldn't barely get through Spanish. So I switched fields and got into science. And I really never looked back. Science was to me, a much more illuminating way of thinking about the world and trying to figure things out and answer questions than theology was. So I've never regretted it, and I gave up my beliefs, my religious beliefs and faith in about 7 years later total.
So in 2005, you wrote a piece called "Why I Am an Atheist," and in that piece, you said that you prefer to be called a skeptic rather than an atheist. But recently, you've been more active about claiming your non-belief. Do you still hold the same perspective that you would prefer to be called a skeptic in a time when coming out as an atheist is more important than ever?
Well, I use the word skeptic because it's the name of my magazine.
Yeah.
And it's a good word. Skepticism is a virtue. It's a good thing. But technically speaking, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God, if that's what you mean by atheist. Although, see, in the general public, people, that's not what they mean by atheist. They mean that somebody who absolutely believes or can prove that there is no God. Of course, technically, I can't prove there is no God, but I can certainly marshal a lot of evidence that there is no God, or that God was created, the concept of God was created by people. And so in my book, I have a whole chapter just marshaling the evidence to show that humans created God and not vice versa. And then there's the word agnostic. I mean, technically what Thomas Huxley meant by the word when he coined it in 1869 was unknowable, that it isn't possible to know if there's a God. So technically that's also correct. If by God you mean a supernatural being, a being that's outside of space and time, then it isn't possible for us to have access to such a being and therefore we can't know if such a being exists or not. So these are all just words that, it's helpful to define what you mean. I do pretty much most of the time just call myself an atheist, because that's what people mean when they talk about somebody like me who doesn't believe in God. So fine.
So the belief in God is dying. What can you say about the belief in superstition and the paranormal and the pseudoscientific? Do you think they're dying as well?
Well, it depends on the claim. These things come and go depending on what's hot in pop culture. So, for example, Bigfoot, sometimes the rates of belief in Bigfoot go up and they go down, and there's, depending on how many TV shows there are about it or whatever, or exorcisms or crop circles or UFOs or whatever. For the most part, they've been pretty stable across the board, given those local fluctuations in beliefs. But in general, belief in the paranormal has been fairly steady for the last several decades. So I can't say it's declining just in the last couple of decades, although I can say in the last 500 years, again, take the long perspective of the historian, certainly rates of belief now are much lower than they were back in the Middle Ages, when everybody believed. Pretty much everybody believed. So we've come a long way since then.
So is the universe a noun or a verb? I'm kidding. Of course, I'm referring to this question that Deepak Chopra once asked you in that short video that I just saw. And he claims that you're one of his worst critics, but also one of his best friends. So about Deepak Chopra, do you think that he is sincere in what he believes, or do you think that he already knows that some of the things that he believes is nonsense and he's just running with it?
Oh, I think he's absolutely sincere, 100%. Totally believes what he says. No question about it in my mind. He's a believer. He and I share different worldviews. He starts with something of a Buddhist type or Eastern philosophy point of view, and I'm coming from a Western, more materialistic, reductionistic, scientific worldview. Although he calls his worldview scientific, he starts with the idea that there's consciousness, and then from that he derives material things. But I claim that consciousness is a product of material substances, in other words, brains, neurons. So with the starting point, there's sort of a metaphysical leap. You have to start somewhere. And so he starts inside his own head with himself as a conscious being, and that consciousness precedes everything else. I don't start there, and most scientists don't either.
You said something during his interview that I found interesting, and I just want to probe it a bit. When he asked you about your thoughts on death, you said that you live in blissful ignorance of negative things as much as you can. So what did you mean by this? Is this a personal philosophy of being positive, or?
Wait, I said that, or he said that?
You said that actually, or maybe you said that as a joke or tongue in cheek.
I think it was kind of a tongue in cheek.
I
mean, I'm in general an optimist by temperament, and I often employ the over-optimism bias and just assuming things are going to go well for me, and for science and for the world and for skepticism or whatever. I'm just fairly optimistic. So, of course, I could be wrong, but I don't mean that. That really doesn't have anything to do with Deepak. I do think the worldview that Deepak offers is very much like religion. Religion offers eternal life and happiness and hope and love and so forth. And Deepak kind of does that in his own way. People seem to like the message, the idea of there's eternal, infinite possibilities. You can become anything you want to become. You can make anything happen that you want. You can materialize anything you want. So forth. People like hearing that, of course. And to a certain extent, if you're not motivated to try to get anything, then you won't. So, to a certain extent, of course, thoughts affect behavior. I mean, everybody knows that. But I think what Deepak is proposing is more than that. That there's a force beyond just your brain and my brain wanting things to happen. So we then go out and get a job and earn money and buy the car, as opposed to the car just mysteriously appearing in our driveway because we willed it to be so. I don't know if Deepak actually believes that, but there are a lot of people that do. The people that write that book, The Secret, and so forth. And so that I guess it turns on what do you mean by thoughts affecting behavior. Of course, course thoughts affect behavior, but what do you mean by that, in a supernatural sense or a natural sense?
Yeah, so thoughts are things is one of the common things that Deepak says, and it's a very enticing message to many. Speaking of an enticing message, the Pope has said some very progressive things. The Roman Catholic Pope, so being very lenient of these religious figures or pseudo-scientific figures. Are you a skeptic of the Pope?
Well, this Pope, I'm very encouraged by his liberal views on, say, homosexuality and gay marriage and so on. I mean, he's not a full-on supporter of the idea, but on the other hand, he's a lot more receptive to homosexuality and gays and so forth, their rights, than previous popes. So I count that as moral progress. That's a little step forward. No thanks to religion. I mean, he's not deriving that from some new interpretation of the Bible. He's not citing some passage no one noticed, like, oh, wow, I skipped that one. I didn't see that one. Says, it's okay for gays to get married. He's not getting it from religion. He's getting it from secular culture. That is the Enlightenment program of expanding the moral circle to include more people, including, blacks and women and gays and, minorities, even animals, for rights. What's being reflected there by the Pope is the larger trend in Western society to move toward more all-inclusiveness of people. And so he, to his credit, he's recognizing that and saying something about it, and that's good.
So whether he deserves it or not, he was named Time Person of the Year. If you could name a person of the year, who deserves to get more attention for, progressing science and skepticism, who would it be?
Oh, I suppose Richard Dawkins or Steven Pinker. One of the two of them, I think, would get my vote.
Great. And there's, of course, an upcoming movie of the Unbelievers, I think. And I look forward to seeing that. So aside from Deepak Chopra or the Pope, like, there are people who you're also very familiar with. And I'd like to hear your opinion on them. Let's say someone like Francis Collins and, people you call heretic scientists. So why do you think these people who are otherwise smart in other ways are capable of believing very weird things?
Well, my short answer is that smart people believe weird things because they arrived at those beliefs for non-smart reasons. Another way to say that is you can't reason somebody out of a belief that they didn't reason their way into in the first place. That is, emotions and psychology and culture, shape what we believe. And then the rationality, or in many cases, the rationalization of the beliefs happens after that. It's after the fact that you're already committed to the belief, then you go find reasons to support it.
So you yourself were once a skeptic of human cause or anthropogenic climate change, but you changed your mind. So can you tell us a little bit about the experience?
Well, so I was skeptical of the environmental movement in the late 80s and 90s, mainly because all the predictions they made in the 70s didn't come true. In fact, they sort of made these doomsday, apocalyptic, millenarian, end of the world scenarios that were not even close to being true. So I think, legitimately skeptical. And to a certain extent, the environmental movement is a political movement, so you would expect that. You can't fill your coffers with financial support and people support by saying that things are great and getting better and we don't need your support anymore. So you have to kind of wave the red meat and cry that, Western civilization as we know it is going to come to an end if you don't take out your checkbook right now and send us a donation. All nonprofits do that, so I recognize that. But I think it just went too far with saying more than what we knew about the science. By the 2000s, the early 2000s, I think the evidence was in that global warming is real and human caused, or I should say global climate change. It snowed on the pyramids for the first time in 115 years. What global warming? But in fact, what we're talking about is global climate change, more radical weather events like that. So that, I think the evidence is pretty solid. I'm still not convinced that that we're doomed. I'm still optimistic that we can do something about it, and I don't think the effects will be as bad as that are projected. But I think it's a real issue that we need to address.
And you said at the end of that article where you said that you changed your mind, that the time for skepticism on the issue is over and it's the time for activism. So on that note, should skeptics be activists as well, like on the issues that they're skeptical about?
Absolutely. If you want to change the world, you have to do something about it. You can't just talk about it. And so, social activism is part of the long trajectory of expanding the moral sphere and moral progress. And the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice because people are, they say something, they protest, they go out and do something, and that's important.
So, as a leader of the skeptical movement, what do you think are the main challenges that young skeptics will have to face as they get into this?
Well, I guess religion's an ongoing force in terms of who resists this, but there's others. I think the biggest thing is just making media contacts and figuring out what's the right thing to do.
So, other people in the skeptical movement are claiming that we should go beyond just criticizing bad ideas and just criticizing unscientific ideas to including social justice issues or women's rights issues, being inclusive of gender and race. What do you think of the people asking that, skepticism should not just be skepticism or atheism just atheism? You should add a plus to it, as in atheism plus, or secular humanism. Yeah.
So there's a certain division of labor amongst all the different groups, and so it depends on the issue. I completely support, like skeptics should be promoting science. We should not define ourselves by what we don't believe. What do we believe? We believe in science and reason. So to that extent, I'm 100% behind that. In terms of the social justice issues, of course, I'm personally supportive of those. But the humanists organizations are already doing that pretty well. And they're not doing the kinds of things we're doing. So I think maybe the division of labor, just as a pragmatic means, is appropriate. And then also, there's always the risk of taking a political position that maybe not everybody agrees with you on, simply because they're not as liberal as you or progressive as you or whatever. And we need conservatives. I mean, if we want to save the world, want to, do something about climate change and species extinction and so on, we need conservatives behind the cause. So I'm always hesitant about saying, in order to be a humanist, you have to believe all the following points that are mostly political points, because then you're excluding well over half the population, and that's a little risky. I think it's better if we stay out of politics.
Okay, and what are you working on, or what's next for you? What projects or activities would you tell your fans who are listening to wait for?
Well, the book I'm writing now that I have to turn in the spring is called The Moral Arc of Science. The Moral Arc, as in Martin Luther King Jr.'s comment, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And not just justice, but truth, thanks to science, and freedom and prosperity and so forth. So my next book is going to be a big one. It'll be my longest book by far, and it documents all these changes, but goes beyond that. It not only shows that we're more moral than we've ever been, but that we can thank science and reason for that fact. And I outline basically what we can do to continue to push the moral arc, moral progress forward.
I look forward to reading that. And thank you so much for your time, Michael. And
you're welcome.
Hope to talk to you again next time.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay.
Ciao.
Ciao. Bye.